and gentlemen, good morning everybody. I'm pleased to see you here and welcome to the city of Groningen, although it's raining a little bit, but that's what happens sometimes. I'm really pleased to see you all because we are a great international group. This is not only North Sea region people, there are also people here from Italy, from Morocco, from Spain. So we are a really international group beyond the North Sea region, as we always say in the Interact program, but we will hear more about that later. I would like to say a few words about this building here because it has a nice history. It was built in 1930 as a cinema, and it has survived all the fightings at the Grote Markt in 1945, you know, when Groningen was liberated by Polish and Canadian troops. There were big fights around here, and the north part and the east part were totally damaged. But this building survived. So this is a great thing. And it went on as a cinema after the war. And what you see here are all the original walls around you. And for the rest, of course, there's modern furniture and everything. But this is the original building. It's the unique Art Deco building in Groningen. So we are very happy that it still exists. And it has a long history as a theater, cinema first, in the first instance, and then it went bankrupt in 1977. That was very sad. So it was empty and nobody knew what to do with it really, until some, what can I say, some pioneers, some volunteers, some people with good ideas came here and said, this building is empty, but it's a beautiful building, we should do something with it. So they occupied the building. They were kind of Scottish. And they developed new plans for this building, and they were innovators. They were for free artists, and they did very nice alternative theater programs here, and they did rehearsals with all kinds of international actors and companies and everything. And that is, since 1980, what this theater is. It had its ups and downs, but it still survived, and it's a really nice place if you want to see good theater, good performances, interesting things, then come to this place. It's fantastic. That brings me to the point that SalFar is also a team of pioneers, of innovators, and of volunteers, and of people who look beyond borders. Because who would say we can grow vegetables in saline soil? No, everybody would say this is completely impossible. But we showed the contrary. And that is what this conference is about, and that is what we want to show you. And what we did in recent years is absolutely amazing, I must say. It is something which I didn't expect at all, and all the team didn't expect at all, because we work together now since about 4.5 years, even longer with the 2 years of preparation for this project. And we really have amazing results we didn't expect before. So this is something we want to share with you. And also our Minister of Agriculture will give us a little speech. He can't come here personally, but he will be there on the video, which I just will switch on. And there's possibly another little story behind this. This is Henk Staghouwer, who was the former provincial executive, the gedeputeerde, as we say, of the province of Groningen. So we know him very well, and he knows the SalFar project also very well. He supported it at the time. So surprisingly, he became a minister for agriculture in January this year. So we were chasing him because he was on the project, on the agenda already. But then he had too many other obligations, so he couldn't come. But he welcomes you warmly, and he would like to speak to you from the screen, but we will not.
Hello, everyone. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome you to the SalFar Final Conference. an important gathering, and I'm sure there are some familiar faces out there. Because when I was a member of the executive of this beautiful province, I learned all about farming on saline land. Despite the salty conditions, attempts are being made to grow crops like potatoes, beans and onions. And I got to taste oyster leaf, salty fingers and ice plants. All vegetables from Groningen soil. Soil that has become too saline for traditional crops. But you're growing new kinds of crops with a lot of blood, sweat and tears. Pioneering work like this is crucial because climate change is making our land more and more saline and making it more difficult to grow food. In 2030, some 125,000 hectares of land in this country will consist of saline soil. That's almost 200,000 football pitches. And that's just in the Netherlands. Salinization is an even bigger problem worldwide. In Africa, 70 million hectares of land is too saline. That's why it's important to look beyond national borders and join together to see how we can still use this land for agriculture. And you're working hard on that already. So, keep up the good work, including after the next 2 days. I wish you all every success.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. That were really encouraging words, and I really like it how his speech is now, because it was a little bit different 5 years ago. He was not really convinced. He was thinking, what are they doing there? Is that really good work? But obviously, we convinced him with our work, which is great. One word about this picture here. That is the pioneer as such, the pioneer of the pioneers. That is Mark Rijsselberger and his farm on the island of Texel. And Mark, very unfortunately, cannot be with us today because he has heart problems. He's in the hospital. So he wishes us all the best and gives you all his warm heart and wishes us success with this conference. But later on we will have little presents from him. I can tell you, you will all get little things from his farm and from the salty soil, which you can take home. Then with this farm, this is more or less, that is also on our folder, this is in all our publications, because that was the first farm, and that was 30 years ago, which tried saline farming. But now I will give you a short overview about the project Saline Farming and what we did. Just a short introduction with a few pictures so that you can see what kind of work we did. And the first thing, of course, is to mention that this is an Interreg 5B project for the North Sea region. So all North Sea region countries have been involved and are still involved in this project. And what we also have, in that sense, we have a multidisciplinary team. So that means this is not only scientists, these are farmers and food producers from Denmark, from Germany, from Norway and the Netherlands. There are the microbiologists from the University of Gothenburg and Lund in Sweden. There are agricultural scientists and soil experts from the NMBU Life Science University of Norway. There are people from agricultural sciences and economists from the University of Lincoln. There's a knowledge center for food innovation from Food and Biocluster Denmark. There is the Vlaamse Landmaatschappij and the Institute for Agriculture and Fisheries Research, ILVO, in Belgium, and there are climate experts, policy advisors, and regional municipalities with whom we work together as stakeholders. So you see, this is a real multidisciplinary team, and that led to great mutual learning, all in all, and that brought us to new ideas. So just very short, the SalFar work packages, the first one was led by the province of Groningen, who is the lead partner anyhow. That's project management. The second one is communication activities. There is Laila Dam, our great communication officer, who made everything possible in terms of the website, in terms of conferences, in terms of all newsletters. Every newsletter you get is coming from Laila. She's sitting over there. Then we have work package 3, University of Lincoln. That was the baseline study. These are the people who brought into picture the salinization in the North Sea region. And we have a salinization map. We have a study on different policies and so on and so on. We have work package 4, which is our core work packages. That is the living labs for saline farming. That is led by the University of Gothenburg. Professor Henrik Aronsson sitting over there in the dark, but he will come to tell you more details about the field trials we did. Then we have work package 5, Food and Biocluster Denmark is the leading organization. Business strategies for eco-innovative food production. Unique food from innovative farming conditions. And that is very interesting because that is a work package that was a little bit, because of changing of partners and some other things, they only started really last year, a little bit before, and they went off like a rocket, because what they did in this short time, it was really fantastic. So we will have presentations of that tomorrow morning from Taina Mendana and from Dotte Stocker and from Louise Krog-Jonsen, who is leading this work package. And then we have work package 6, Vlaamse Landmaatschappij and ILVO, awareness raising, capacity building and governance. So these are the 6 work packages we worked on, and you will hear more about that tomorrow and today. Core of the project, I said already, is the living labs for saline farming, and we have living labs in fantastic ways. We have high-tech living labs with mixing stations, computer steered and things like that. And we have these nice people who are the volunteers from the island of Terschelling, who just got a plot from a farmer who couldn't deal with it anymore, who said, this is all saline ground, I can't do anything. And what you see here is the dike of the island Terschelling and the just freshly digged plot of saline soil in front of it. Then you see what they've done. They have put sea aster into it, and this is all volunteer work. And you see there was a kind of what we call in Dutch Troost moment for the people after they've done all this work, after they have installed this test field. And you see there's also television around sometimes and informing with or asking people, doing interviews with the farmers or with the volunteers. I mean, this is a potato farmer in real life, but he volunteers for this project as well. And that is poor handwork on the island of Terschelling. And what you see, the contrary is this highly technical work on the other side with what I just said, mixing station. This is SPNR Agro Research in Kolmerwaard, which we will visit this afternoon. And you see what we have there is winter wheat and saline potatoes on the other side. And we are dealing with all kinds of crops. That is possibly interesting to mention, because this is not just about halophytes, but this is about just normal crops, like wheat and oats and like carrots and potatoes. But we are dealing with halophytes as well. These are plants that naturally grow in a saline environment. These are just a few examples. Here we have kale in a saline environment, and we have Cochlearia officinalis and salicornia in alluvium mud of the River Eems from the Ökowerk Emden. They were also great in their pioneering work, trying all kinds of things which we thought were not possible, like developing a fertilizer from bladderwrack, which is flushed against the dikes, and in that sense doing very good environmental work. Transnational cooperation, of course, was very important. You see here Swedish, German, Dutch, and a Spanish co-worker doing installing the test field on the island of Texel from Mark. And what they're doing here, they're experimenting with the first lines of wheat and oats, and which will later then take into the laboratory in Gothenburg again to be tested, analyzed. Then one thing was important in our project. That was the summer in 2018, which was very, very dry. Everybody will remember that. And for the first time, we had more farmers coming saying, what can we do? I mean, our fields are too dry. We can't irrigate them anymore with fresh water. What can we do? And then we showed them that there is a possibility to irrigate with brackish water, which you see here on the right-hand side. These are potatoes, totally dry, on the island of Texel, and these are potatoes on the island of Texel, done with brackish water, both in the summer of 2018. So that convinced a number of farmers to try things and to be pioneers as well, and to be a little bit more innovative. So we do all kinds of workshops with farmers and so on. So that is our core business in a sense, sharing knowledge. And just a few things we will do, and then I will stop, and then Henrik will come with the next presentation in more detail. So our conclusion is that salt is our friend if we choose the right varieties of crops, if we know the techniques, and if we use suitable fertilizers, and if we take care of good soil management. Soil management, the expert is sitting over there, he will tell you much more in detail what that means. And we organize, and that is important, the cooperation with the farmers. We organize farmers' cafes, workshops for policymakers, transnational information education centers, food innovation, cooking workshops, advice for restaurants, and you will have the first saline dinner possibly of your life tonight, done by Flangen de Pan from the island Terschelling. He's working hard already with his whole team. And we do publications like the inspirational guide on saline farming, which you have seen possibly already at the registration desk. And we have the book, published the book after the last conference in Leeuwarden in 2019, Future of Sustainable Agriculture in Saline Environments. That is, in short, what we have done so far, just to give you an impression and to show you a few pictures what we have done until now, but more in detail is coming now from Professor Henrik Aronsson from the University of Gothenburg. He will talk about the field trials we did and about the results of them. Henrik, please.
Thank you. Nice opportunity to talk about what we've done the last 4.5 years. I'm Henrik Aronsson from the University of Gothenburg, Sweden. So we'll go through a little bit what we experienced through the years with the living labs. And you might ask directly, what is the definition of a living lab? I mean, Texel you might know about since before. I mean, there's quite a large area there, but there's also small areas which we call living lab as well. It could be quite small in square meters, so to speak. But let's see what we have here. And I was told I should do it more in a popular science way. So I've divided my presentation into 10 questions, and I hope that you can see what they are, what we are answering there. And it's linked to them to the project. Okay, so we already know that we are a cooperation of different organizations here, and it is in the Interreg region then. So my first question is, stand here so I can see the questions. What is saline farming? And that is agriculture that makes use of salt-tolerant crop varieties So it could be different ones for the same crop, of course. Both conventional crops and halophytes, which is salt-loving ones. And then I framed this a little bit extra, modified farming practices to allow yield under salt-affected conditions. And the pictures here showing that you have different ways then to handle the saline farming with drip irrigation like in Texel. There is tractor spraying like in Norway, another kind of spray that they did in Denmark, keep moist manually like in Terschelling, and overhead gun like in UK. So it's different ways to treat the soil and the management here to improve saline farming or test things there. Soil may be saline, which means a lot of salts. We might be sodic, which is usually an accumulation of sodium instead, with a mixture of the two here. So what is considered salt-affected soils? We need to have some kind of thresholds here when we discuss this. So salts dissolve into ions in water, and then the more ions, the higher the capacity for them to carry an electrical current. And that can then be measured as conductivity, often measured in decisiemens per meter. And soils, they are considered saline, bad, so to speak, for the plants, if they get electrical conductivity around 4 decisiemens per meter. Of course, some plants, they can cope with this one, but usually if you come to that level, then it starts to be a little bit harsh for them. So in Lincolnshire, of course, they are trying, let's see if we can find this button. Oh, okay, so there they are trying them different kind of salt conditions there. There's 4, 8, 12 decisiemens, and they mix it then with the seawater there. And in Texel, there has been levels from 1 up to 32 decisiemens, and that's really, really high salt concentration in the soil. You don't expect much of it to actually survive there. The next question is, what is the salinity of seawater? Because we talk a lot about brackish here, and should we use the thing that is around us here in the North Sea? So seawater contains around 7 teaspoons of salt per liter, which equals roughly 3.5%. And that conductivity is around 50 decisiemens per meter. It's even more than they had in Texel there. And tap water has less than 1.5 decisiemens per meter. That we call freshwater now. So seawater salinity is well above the threshold for survival of most plants. So we don't want to actually just put it in there, and we will come back to that soon. But we use this kind of water as well. In Terschelling, there has been brackish, which means that you mix it with fresh water. And there's of course also seawater coming into the ditch sometimes there. And then in Sweden, we have tried at Kristineberg Marine Station to grow things hydroponically, on water directly, mixing with the deep salt water from the fjord there with fresh water. In Jaren, they're also mixing the seawater with fresh water and go with the tractor to spray and mimic, you can say, kind of rain boost there. And you have to remember, we'll come back to that, but we don't treat them with saline all throughout the years. In some places, it's just a boost that to replace the avoidance or the missing rainfall, so to speak. How do salt-affected soils affect the crops? That is the major thing here as well. Otherwise we would have grown them a long time ago there. So salt-affected soils reduce the crop yields, and that's of course important for the farmers in the end. For most crops, total biomass decreases as external salt increases. So the more salt in the soil, the less yield. And then of course it's not good. But salt can also stimulate the yield of some of your salt-tolerant plants like halophytes, so they like the salt, so it can be positive for them. So when we were in Texel, I'm working with wheat mainly. We were in Texel then, and then we measured in the summer different lines. We had a mutant population, so there was several different lines with different variations of genetic content. And there you can see definitely with the more salt, the less the biomass, the less the height, the less the spike length, etc. So of course salt has an effect on your lines. But of course there's some length that is better than the other ones, and these are the ones we want to keep in the future. So these are the pictures from Texel the summer 2018. So why do we need salt-tolerant crops? That's another question. Why are we gathered here today? Well, there are roughly more than 1 million, I think it should be 1 billion hectares, sorry there, 1 billion hectares, and 1 hectare is equal to 1 football pitch, or football field. So you can see there's a lot of areas is affected here in the world today. So this is also reducing then, of course, the yield. So we need salt-tolerant crops to turn salt-affected soils into productive areas again. And then you might think about Europe. How much are we affected in Europe? Because we hear about Asia sometimes, Africa, etc. But in Europe, if you take consideration 2 decisiemens, I said 4 is a good way to say it's very saline, but FAO did an announcement last year in November, and they have 2 decisiemens as a threshold. So keep that in mind. But at least in Europe, if you have 2 decisiemens, it's around 4.4 million hectares that is affected on the topsoil, and around 10.8 million hectares on the subsoil. It's quite large areas. And as a Swede, we usually say that in Sweden we produce crops on 2.6 million hectares per year. So if you put that into this calculation, then you see there's quite large areas there that can be used, or going to be affected negatively. So then, of course, from this project we have seen data then on different varieties and crops that is actually working in those range of decisiemens, like potato. There we have 90% yield, around 4 to 5 decisiemens, and some about 7 decisiemens. Perfect. Sugar beets is a good one. We noticed it before, but we have 90% yield there on test for 12 to 14 decisiemens with a good sugar content still, which is good for the application, for industrial applications, etc. Carrots, some of them has 90% yield still at 7.2 decisiemens. We will come back soon and say that not all carrots, there are differences between varieties, etc. So how can successful crop cultivation be achieved under saline conditions? You've probably already seen it popping up here, but you need to combine appropriate soil and water management. You need to have the right soil. Sandy soil is better than clay soil if you put some brackish water there, for example. And you have to have a suitable crop and variety that is tolerant. And you need to find out that they can cope with the climate conditions. And for sustainability, prevention of increasing salinity, that's something we need to discuss also. How much brackish water can you add without destroying the soil? So you have a good soil drainage is very useful here. So we have halophytes, for example, in Emden, Germany, the Schelling, Carcalla, Salicornia, glasswood, and there's more of them. Of course, this is maybe not the plant you want to have in a big field, because the market is not so big at the moment. But at least for the local market, restaurants, etc., it's worth going that way, definitely. And who knows, maybe we will buy more and more of this Salicornia in the stores in the future, but at the moment it's not the top priority when you go to the shop, okay? So how do salt-tolerant plants cope with salinity? What is actually doing them good? Why do we choose this kind of varieties for the field? So the salts found in saline soil present a challenge for the uptake of water by roots, a little bit like drought. So if the salt concentration in the soil is very high, the toxic ions can accumulate inside the leaves, and that will lead to lower yield and eventually death. So if you take too much sodium up into the plant, it doesn't like it. And you might have some plant that is very good in leaving the natrium or the sodium, so to speak, into special areas of the cell, and then they might still be okay to live. And there might be some that is good in not bringing them up into the roots. And I'm, as a molecular biologist, is working with this in the lab, and we can see some lines in which it's really good in this one. They take up a lot of sodium, but they're still having a good yield. They might even be good for remediation in the future. But interesting here is also the thresholds of tolerance vary with crop and variety. You might see some data that say that, oh, carrot is 5.6, wheat is 3.3, oat is 6.5. But this is not true, because there's a range always. You can't trust that this is exactly the same for all of the carrots, etc. So here you can see the things we have tried and tested for 4 different varieties of carrots, Denves, Nantes, and Queller in Napoli. And you can see that the yield of 90% is 7.2 on the best one, but 4.4 on the lowest one. So you can't go out and say that it's 4.4 for carrots, and you can't say it's 7.2. It's a range. So you need to try different settings here. And this is an important take-home message. It is a range. Don't trust that it's a one single point value there for each variety. Which plants are suitable for successful farming on salt-affected land? And again, it depends on the composition and the level of the salt in the soil, as different crops have different thresholds then. There is a range then, as I said before, and if you look at the list here to the right, potato in our experiments is between 4 and 7. Carrots 4.4 to 7.2. Wheat even down to 0.3, but this was Bangladeshian wheat varieties tried here in European climate conditions. So some of them didn't like it at all. But some of them really was well done here, 6.9. Sugar beet, 12 to 14. Red beet, 11 to 14. Brassica, different brassica, 3.3 to 6.5. So keep in mind the list of yield, loss threshold, etc. for different crops have been produced, but be a little bit skeptic. It's an indicative value. It might be better or lower actually for the variety you pick there. So then, can one use nearby seawater or brackish water in agriculture? I mean, Angelica mentioned it before. I would still start with the first sentence there. Fresh water is always the best alternative for agriculture. But sometimes there is no option. Like in 2018, also in Sweden, we were forbidden to add water on the agriculture there because there was no more fresh water. The groundwater was empty. And then there could be an option to go at least for some boost with brackish water to survive. So it doesn't have to be halophyte, it could actually be normal crops then. But of course, to avoid negative consequences, it's important to take into account the salinity of the brackish water, the nature of the soil, sandy or clay, the amount of water added, duration of the irrigation, and the salt tolerance of the plant. And this is something I think would be the next step of SalFar part is to go in to see what happens with the soil. We will hear more about the soil thing from Oscar here soon. And this is just to show a little bit from the potato experiments we've done. Different potato varieties on the top there. Locations from UK, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, and different ways the salt concentration have been added, etc. But if you look at the observation down at the lower row in UK, there is no significant impacts of brackish irrigation to potato yield there. It is at least the same as it was before you give them some kind of flash there. Same in Norway, no significant impact of the flashes of brackish water during a short period in the summer. In Denmark, they could see that one of the variety was okay, the other was bad, so then of course we shouldn't pick that one in the future. And in Terschelling, where this is clay soil, it's quite tough conditions there, but they have shown that still, with counting in the rain, etc., and drought, it is possible to grow some potato there as well, even though the yield might not be exactly as good as in, let's say, good conditions in Holland somewhere else, in the Netherlands. And then in Texel, there's plenty of different varieties tested, and you can see there's a range from 4.5 to 7 decisiemens there. So it could be useful then, of course. And my last question is, will products taste salty? Yeah. With exception of a few halophytic crops, we'll come back to them soon here, most vegetables, fruits, grains, seeds have not been reported to have increased levels of salt or taste really salty. This could make grain and seed crops particularly valuable for animal consumption. Anyhow, some plants may have sweeter taste if the plant uses sugars to help combat the effects of those external salt particles, like an osmolyte, and to make sugar instead. This has happened in tomato. And also, of course, there is a question that sometimes from people that would like to see our wheat, that will it taste salt, the wheat, in the future? And even if it was, is that a problem? Because if you know the content of the salt in your grain in the future, you might just tell that on the package, and then of course my mom doesn't have to put in salt when she makes the cookies. I mean, that's the way you have to think about things. But of course you should also be careful if you bring in too much salt into the body, that is not healthy. But you need to be careful also how you pronounce or how you tell this about the salt in those products in the future. So just for the halophytes, from the Emden, they have tested plenty of different plants there, and there is a column there with glasswort, heartleaf, golden samphire, etc., etc. And they've used it in different food ingredients like salad, cooked, or even soap that's probably not going to be eaten. But anyhow, the note here to the right is interesting, that they can see fresh and salty. There is one down there called taste resembles spinach, if you like that one. Taste like parsley or celery. Sea fennel-like taste. So there's a lot of things still to do there when it comes to the marketing, which also I think the Danish group is doing here. How do you get those things into the market? Because same with the Saline, even though it might be good, you need to market it in the right way to get it into the consumers. So at least we are on our way. So the conclusion is, if you would like to go into this business, there are seeds that can be obtained from different sources, companies, growers, cooperatives, or researchers even. It's a challenge to find out what to grow in a specific area with a specific soil type. As you can see now, you have to dig a little bit into details before you get into the production there. And there's a diversity of plants to be considered due to different saline scenarios. Water seepage, aerosols, flooding, etc. And salt-tolerant plants do have different mechanisms to survive saline growth. And as a farmer, maybe that's not so important, but as a scientist, we really love to understand the mechanism, etc., to publish. But for the farmers, you want to have something that is working for you. And the products with increasing salt content might be candidates of dietary and sensory interest, like the Emden is doing here. But there are many questions that remain to be answered with forthcoming future field tests at different locations, different conditions, and with different plant varieties. So this is just the start of this saline farming era, I would say, in Europe here. I always want to show a few quick slides to just show that we have done a lot of things there, even though we didn't get into details here today. Beets, sugar beets, red beets, 90% yield, 12 to 14, 90% yield, 11 to 14. Brassica crops, different ones, Brussels sprout, cauliflower, white cabbage, kohlrabi. No significant impacts of brackish watering there when it did it in Lincoln. 90% yield, 3.3, 6.5, 4.5. Could be useful in different areas in Europe. Pastures, also important. This is experiments from Norway. Timothy, ryegrass, meadow fescue. And again, the other observation down there, acceptable yield despite increased saline irrigation, which is good indications that could be used for brackish watering in periods at least. And by that, I finish off the halophytes in their work in Emden, 4 different ones here. And they have been treated with 15 decisiemens of salt continuously. And they see that these 4 halophytes show good biomass production at these high salt levels, which is also good numbers here for us. I want to acknowledge all the partners, of course, but also Dow and Angelica running this project together with us for 4.5, almost 4 years. Rodriguez Foundation sponsoring my molecular lab work. The Vasak, Clean Flowers, Sharon Baines, Dionisia Lyra for cooperating with me with questions that we have brought up here today. And of course also Pierre Bellinger was the guy that invented and said, should we do something together? And then we did it, and here we are today. Thanks.
Here we are today. So I know that there are farmers and agricultural scientists and economists around us here, so we can take a few questions if you like to ask. Yes, over there to the left.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It's very interesting. What I was wondering, the EC values you showed for the different crops, are they measured in the irrigation water or in the soil?
When it comes to the tessel, it's in the soil, but some of the other ones is in the irrigation water. So they haven't measured the soil content in some of the places.
Yeah, that was also my question to do without microphone, because you can measure what you want in the irrigation water, but in the end, it doesn't tell you much, because in a year like last year, it was plenty of rain. You can give salty water and it will all wash away, especially on soils with a big buffer. So that's not that, doesn't give you much knowledge actually. So I think you cannot do it without measuring the EC in the soil, because that is what the plant experiences. So without it, it's just, you keep it as a black box. And for me, the difficulty is also with this project, like in the Netherlands, I'm from the southwest where we have salinity problems. But you're always competing, for example, with as a farmer with Flevoland, where there's plenty of fresh water. So any reduction is actually not an option. So therefore, especially not in the northwest part of Europe, maybe in parts of the world where there are no other alternatives. But therefore, I'm a bit skeptical. What do you want to?
Okay, can I try to answer that one? I mean, the numbers we gave for the crops here, they are from the soil diseases. I mean, definitely. But then you have, when you have the flush and boost of things like in Norway or maybe something in Lincolnshire, it's more to save them from the drought. And then you don't measure the soil, then it's more the diseases on the irrigation there. So from the Norway and from, for example, Lincolnshire, we can't say what the diseases was in the soil, and that is not brought up here. That's mainly only from Tessel, where it's really controlled, where we also have the weed stuff there. And these kind of stations like an SPNA now is really important for the future. And now you have to know that this is not only ongoing in Europe. They have this kind of station also built up in Bangladesh. They're going to do it, I think, in Egypt soon as well, in different climate conditions, which is important as well. Because the thing you see in Netherlands might not work in Pakistan. So that's also important to remember.
It's to the North Sea region, right? They support the North Sea region.
Yeah, so here, what you see here today,
Interesting for that, but it's
yeah.
the North Sea region.
So what you see here today, those numbers you can trust for the Interreg region here.
I saw you, Albin here, please. So, and then you up there, okay. Albin?
Well, there's one question from you is about the competition effect. If more soil gets, has reduced yields, how do you still compete with the good soils? But my small question in addition to that was quite different, which is if the salt is not taken up by the plants, where does it go? Does it accumulate, or if it's washed away, where does it go? Does it accumulate somewhere else? But the yield question is equally important, I think.
Yeah, I think the yield question is what you want to know if you're a farmer, especially in Europe. I mean, you want to know because you have a hard competition. If you go a little bit worldwide, it might be better to grow something that don't grow it at all, because it might be a fallow period, which is not happening here in the same way. The salt, yes, if it doesn't go into the plant, it might stay, unless you have a sandy soil, which usually is good in drainage. It might not even stay up the next period. Then it might go, in the worst case, it might go to the groundwater in the future. And that might be a larger problem.
Yes, there are. Yeah, it's.
Can I?
Yes.
My voice is quite loud. So I'm not an agronomist, neither a plant biologist, so I might not know if I'm framing it correctly. But thanks, it was very interesting work, especially the table where you framed the 90% yield according to the level of salt in the soil. And it would be very much interesting from an economics perspective in order to characterize correctly production function. If we can have the entire curve, so if we can have the whole decay yield function versus the increased salinity, because it's not linear, I guess.
No, it's a curve.
So, and can we have? I mean, have you published it already?
Some of this is published, yes, for some of the varieties. I think it's Gary von Stratten and has done it together with Adrian de Vos, etc. I can't remember the paper name now, but I can give you afterwards there. But some of those plants that is here might not have been published, but there has been similar kind of assays before with this curve taken into consideration, so that's why we use it here as well.
Okay, thank you. I saw more hands. Yeah, Katja, please. You want to
Ecologist, and you did a kind of a multivariate experiment. You looked at irrigation and salinity, but there were also differences in sunlight, nutrients, sediment composition. Did you also do a kind of a multivariate analysis? So how important was the impact of salinity compared to the other differences?
No, that has not been done. And I think you have to go back a little bit to what Angelica said in the beginning, this is not only a scientific project. We have a lot of different actors in this project, and I think sometimes, I'm glad that Angelica got it together, because if you have written the application, what everybody wants it to do, it might have been a little bit too disparate, and we might not even have got the money to start this one. But this is a start, and then you get this awareness that we have an issue here. But we haven't done this multivariate measurements, etc. But the ecosystem is also important here. Now we're talking about single momentums here, but maybe you need to think about bushes, trees to keep the water in the future, around the farming land, etc. There's a lot of work to remain to be done here.
Any more questions for Henrik?
Honor having the microphone. Do you also see differences during the crop production, for example, during how do you say it? When the seed starts to grow, when it comes to maturity of in crop production?
Well, I can't answer for everybody that's done those experiments here with potato, etc. But for the wheat, we can see there's a difference in the flowering time, etc. Depending on the lines and also the salt, of course, there. But in my project, it's more about finding a wheat line that is good to be used in the future. So we have a mutant population, so to speak. So we start from a very good salt-tolerant variety, but want to find something that's even better. And then, of course, it's important to see flowering time and the length before you get the harvest, etc. Because it could save you some time. But we are mainly actually using the European platform to actually go worldwide as well. Even though there is an issue in Europe, there is a bigger one worldwide, that's for sure.
Okay, thank you. I think we conclude here, and then we will ask our dear colleague, Oscar Almos, soil expert from NMU, Norwegian University for Life Sciences.
This work? Yes. Good. As Henrik said, and I think also Angelica, this is a project where the soil has not been in focus in terms of scientific trials. So I'm going to hold more like a lecture than reporting data, because some of us have analyzed electric conductivity, sodium absorption ratio, and so on, but not in a way that is suitable for presenting here. I work at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, and then we easily ask, do Norwegians have any interest in salt? We have a lot of rain, so we normally don't have droughts, sometimes in the spring, but we have a long coast. And if the sea level rises, then in worst case scenario, it may increase to 0.5 meter. So then much of the Norwegian population will live along the coast, and then obviously the agriculture there may be affected. But along worldwide, I think many of you, of course, have an interest in saline soils, so this image may be very familiar to you. Some soils are saline, and some soils are sodic, and some soils are sodic and saline. And you see they're mostly in what we call dry areas. But there's also, of course, obviously, an European problem, mostly in the south along the Mediterranean due to the temperature and insufficient precipitation. But also here around the North Sea. And as you can see here, there are also some numbers. The most interesting part may be that the total affected land areas are increasing annually. So it is an issue. And therefore, there has been different campaigns around, and you see FAO has this nice poster. And one should be aware of, some salts are naturally saline, as you have around here, along the coast. But what we are worried about, in Norway at least, and many developing countries, is the impact of climate change. So there are some species already tolerant, as Andy talked about, and then if we have a change, what happens then? So we have different ways of making the soil saline. It can be due to irrigation, because you irrigate in dry areas and the salt left after evaporation increases the salinity of the soil. So this is sort of indicated by these arrows there. So if the evaporation is higher than the precipitation, you may have an accumulation of salts. We may have some aerosols from sea spray. We tried that in Norway, just test after storms, but they often occurred at the same time as heavy rain. So it's flushed away. But there are some farmers complaining that during the winter the grasses seem to suffer. So it could be some sort of a wind-released earlobes that in a way sticks to the plants and make them sort of affected. Then flooding is an issue, has been a great issue in England, and that is what we are worried about in Norway, because some places you may think of Norway as a land of hills, but at the coast it sort of flattens out, and the rivers coming down from the hills, they're the hydrological current is very low, so you can hardly see them move. And if the salt water comes in there and they use that for irrigation, it may generate some problems. And of course the seepage from groundwater. Yeah, I think that is what I actually said. But what I think is under-communicated is that soil is not just it's a media for plant growth, it's an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem. And you have to work on it to really understand. For instance, let's say the atmosphere as we know it is controlled by, of course, the oxygen production from the photosynthesis, but the respiration is often taking place in soil. So the microbes in soil in what we call the rhizosphere, the soil close to the roots, you have an accumulation of bacteria. And those bacteria are not there just for fun, they aid the plant in carry on the nitrogen cycle, they mobilize metals like iron, zinc and copper, and the number of them is astonishing. Think of a teaspoon of soil contains more cells than the number of people on Earth. They contain a lot of other organisms, nematodes, possibly not what potato growers want to be there, and also long fungal hyphae. But they are very discretely distributed, so it means that they are concentrated on very few spots. And I think, I had a slide that escaped, but it's like there may be a little pocket of very active microbes that can be very important for, let's say, denitrous oxide production and the fluxes from the soil. So they're very, it's more like a desert. You think of it homogeneously distributed, but they're not. That makes soil study of the ecology of soil a bit complicated, to put it nicely. And so, there was someone asking here about the saline, the irrigation, the electric conductivity in the irrigation of water, and of course what happens in the soil is very complex. In a healthy soil, there's a balance between ions, and in a more saline soil, there's an increase of ions. So you get a lot of ions, but if you get a sodic soil, you have a dominance of sodium that makes the soil to collapse. And this is, of course, not just, it depends upon the grain size distribution, whether you have sand or clay, or how much is the organic material, if it's silt and so on. And then, of course, these parameters are measured, and there are various classifications. And as Henrik said, often when it's above 4, then we find the soil being saline, and then we have other parameters that can be measured. The exchangeable sodium percentage, there are numbers, sometimes you see these being 13 and not 15. The pH, whether it's above or below 8.5, which I think is high in any way. And the absorption of sodium absorption ratio, those are, I'll show what they are. And so, of course, we can also, it depends on the method you're doing. The standard method is a saturated paste, but I found that's very subjective. It depends on the person doing it. When is the soil saturated? It's easy to weigh up 1 gram of soil in 2 milliliter water, 1 to 2, and then measure. Then it's more consistent. But this is the standard method. So what kind of parameters do you need to measure? You need to measure pH. And in Norway, the standard way of measuring pH is 1 to 2.5. But as you saw in the previous slide, 1 to 2 is also a sort of a common method. So be aware of the method you're using. Then in that one, you can measure electric conductivity. And again, be aware of if it's from the saturated paste, if it's 1 to 2. That is a slightly different numbers you get. Then you want to measure the exchangeable cations. There are also different methods. Using ammonium acetate is one way. Then it's the ammonium displacing the cations, and you get them into solution. And then you analyze them in an ICP. And then you also correct for the charges. And the charges is very important. If you're not a soil scientist, just remember that calcium magnesium has a double charge, we call them divalent, and sodium potassium has a mono charge. And then you put them into equation, and there are also various equations existing. So that is also something that may impact the value you get. And there's a strong correlation between the sodium adsorption ratio and the exchangeable sodium ratio. But both sort of parameters exist. This is often used in water, this is often used in soil, but I see also this parameter used in soils. Just to be aware of, the salt water contains a lot of chlorine, sodium, but also contains some sulfate, magnesium, bicarbonate, and so on. Not so much calcium. And another thing with the soil is that, if you remember one of the first few slides, the sodium affected soil, they collapse. And that is, if we think about what the soil is composed by, you have the small, this is sort of a scale showing the size of the particles. You have individual particles, microbes and fungi. But then we get something called microaggregates. And they are, in a way, glued together by the charges. So if you remember calcium, divalent, magnesium, divalent, they, in a way, they help to aggregate the soil particles together with some organic material. Those are microaggregates, and then they go together and form what we call macroaggregates. And you can think of it as a pillow. The down makes the pillow sort of soft and not hard. So the root residues and other organic residues, and also charges, iron oxides and so on, aid in generating these macroaggregates. And those are very important. Okay, here they come in different orders. So just remember the micro and macro aggregates. So the salinity, of course, obviously causes osmotic stress that prevents the uptake of water. That's one thing. So that's one of the effects. But the excess of sodium coming into place is like when we have these macro aggregates glued together in a way like this, in a simple sort of way of illustrating it, holding soil particles together because they have two charges. This is a healthy soil. But when we add more sodium, it's being dispersed more and more, and then you have more like individual particles formed together like a card house. That is when the soil becomes sodic. Saline can exist in normal soil, but when it becomes sodic, then you have displacement of the sodium, of calcium and sodium, and then it collapses. And this has, of course, an impact. A normal healthy soil should hold a combination of large pores that quickly infiltrates the water coming down from rain, but also retains some water for the plants to live on the water for a longer period after the rainfall. Then we have something called capillary forces, and as you know, if you build a sand castle, it collapses eventually because it doesn't hold the water so well. If you have a fine structured soil, it may aid in lifting the water up. And that is, of course, if this is saline, it may migrate upwards. But also, as I think one of the questions here, in the sandy soil, sodium is quickly washed through. But this holds the water the sodium better in cases. So are there any options for saline salts? And I understand from the audience that you're all very familiar with the topic. You can have either organic amendments or inorganic amendments, like typically gypsum. That will together improve the soil properties. It will prove the pH will be lower, Because of the better infiltration, you will have a flush of the ions going through the soil profile, and then the electric conductivity will be reduced. It will have an impact on the microbial population. I will just briefly mention that in the end. It will, but most importantly is the soil physical properties, because that has an impact on this. Bulk density is a measure of how dense the soil is per volume. You want the bulk density to be not too low, not too high, so you have particles that can hold nutrients, but a lot of pores that can infiltrate the water. And the aggregate stability should be fair, not hard, and not poor, so you want it to be like a good aggregate stability. And all of this increased infiltration, which is one of the more important things. But and that affects, of course, the chemistry which the plant feels. The point with the gypsum is that the sodium on the soil is replaced by calcium, and then the sodium can be leached, and the calcium can then act in regenerating. Then we go this way. So this is a good and normal, well-functioning soil with a combination of small pores and large pores. And if we have a collapsed soil, not only do the plant roots have difficulties in finding water, maybe it could be either it could be very wet and saturated, and then we have issues with methane, D-nitrous oxide emissions maybe, and also it makes the soil very hard and compact. So here's some examples from the literature showing the impact of gypsum on the infiltration, and you see there's a great infiltration after, and it lasts for some time. So that is obviously a good way of doing it. And here's another experiment showing that years after the addition of the gypsum, we get a better pH. It's still high, I think, but it has to do probably with the place. I mean, a pH of 8 would have difficulty in uptake of cations. The electric conductivity falls quickly below, well, not quickly, but eventually below 1. And the sodium absorption ratio normally reported as sort of critical when it's above 15 or 13, and you see both of these parameters are low. But also, so as Henrik talked about, the uptake of sodium can be aided, and they're very detailed. This table, I don't know if you see it, with no treatment, the leaf, well, it's better shown here. The leaf concentration of sodium to calcium is 4 to 5 times as high, but after the treatments, it's more leveled out. So the gypsum mostly, I think, aid in the soil structure, whereas the addition of farmyard manure increases the cation exchange capacity. And so it may hold some of the sodium so it doesn't been taken up by plants, but it also aids in the soil structure and the generation of aggregates. So both can be a good combination, although I don't know. But of course, it's not always to combat the saline conditions. If you can't beat them, join them. So working with the saline condition rather than trying to change them is an option, as we've been demonstrating in this project. So salt-tolerant varieties, but this depends on the soil. That's what I'm trying to say. The soil is an ecosystem. So why do we do saline farming? We can use less of the fresh water that is valuable in times. Make use of all farmland. To use land where traditional farming is or will become unavailable. So exploit new areas, explore new areas, and yeah. So in conclusion, this is a table we've got from the SalFar Foundation. In sandy soils, it seems like you can do whatever you want to, more or less, unless as long as the plants manage. You don't get sort of permanent soil structure damages, because at least in our region where we have precipitation and rain. So the good possibilities, if you have fresh water obviously, and you can use brackish water to some degree at least. The clay soil, again, you easily get back to this situation. So, no go. So it depends on the soil biology. How does the soil biology like the saline conditions. We tested the soil biology in the test field in Texel, and it was irrigated from 0 to 32 decimils. I'm not going to present that here because I'm working on a publication, so then you keep your cards tight. But what we saw that is when, let's see that this is very saline, this is intermediate saline, that is non-saline. The microbes living here, they've been stressed with this saline condition for so long time. So if I take them out and test them, how much salinity they manage before the growth is reduced, they have been developing some sort of tolerance. And this is what the figure shows here, that the most tolerant bacteria comes from the plots which have been treated with the high saline condition. But there is a limit, and it's not linear. It doesn't mean even these bacteria, they cannot tolerate extreme salinity. But of course, if you take bacteria from extreme environments and test them, they would of course be here. But this is from an agricultural soil. But does this have an impact on the capacity in running the nitrogen cycle, for instance? And that is yet to be investigated. Though they can tolerate salt, but does this stress make them incapable of doing all these reductions of nitrate to nitrogen gas? And how about the mineralization of nitrogen from the plants and so on? So this is yet to be investigated, and we've got a new project just to test this. Yeah. That's it. Yep.
Thank you, Asker. You have shown that soil is a very complex issue, and we should all learn more about it. So I wonder, now that we have the chance with the soil expert from Norway, if there are any questions for him. Yes, over there.
Do you also test other groups of organisms? Because I think bacteria will be the quickest to adapt to any condition. But do you also test protozoa or fungi or other organisms into the soil biology aspect?
Not at this location, but of course that would be very cool to see, and also earthworms and so on. Not bacteria only, also fungus. Yeah, both, yes. And I think it's just something that is coming more and more now because of in the European Union they talk about the soil health, and that is obviously connected to what we're talking about. Yeah, one behind you.
For clay soil.
Yeah.
Yeah, for clay soil. Do you think that organic amendment could help the crop more, especially for, since for sandy soil is suitable for irrigation with saline, but in a humid region, but in arid region it will be more difficult since it will be also not only saline but also drought.
I haven't
calculated and combined stress.
Bas, will you answer that?
Maybe in clay soil, the clay soil maybe that will give with organic amendment will more water retention.
Yeah, the water will increase the water holding capacity, but also infiltration. Is that what you're all talking about?
Also improve aggregation.
Yes,
and drainage.
Yes, it will. So,
yeah. And also bacteria.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe the answer is a biochar. I don't know. It seems to be the answer to anything. Bas, will you comment on that? Or?
No, I agree with your answers. Yes, also in clay soils, adding organic matter improves the cation exchange capacity, the capacity of a soil to form aggregates, thereby drainage. I think you've mentioned all the things.
Yeah. It just came to my attention now. We work in a group where biochar seems to be very helpful for many, many reasons. Increasing the pH is obviously not the option here, but to maybe increase the infiltration, so that could be more like a persistent thing to do than farm yard manure, because that is easily sort of respired, but it does add to in a positive direction. Yeah.
Now, another question from the ecological side. How important do you think is bioturbation for the health?
Bioincubation.
Bioturbation, so animals who...
Oh yeah, bioturbation. Yeah, I think that would do. That would help, of course, if they manage to sort of mix in the top layer of the residues. Yes, of course. Yes. If they thrive in these areas, I don't know. you see some pictures that look like a desert, but if you manage to get the earthworms thriving, I think we have a better impact than, let's say, moles and these animals. Bioturbation should also help.
Yeah, I was also thinking about earthworms.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if you could bring in earthworms which are so tolerant, possibly a bit controversial. Yeah, I mean, if you add some, let's see, residues on the top, it may increase, but then you also get this little potentially release of methane gas if it's, but in dry areas, maybe methane is not an issue. Yeah, behind you, Angelica. Angelica, behind you. Up the road.
Thanks for the presentation. I was wondering if it comes to the loss of production by any of the crops you're investigating. Could you conclude that the loss of production is based on the direct effect of salt, so the osmotic pressure issue which plant cannot tolerate anymore, and just the lack of the ecosystem in the soil itself, which kind of disrupts the nutritional flow towards the plant?
I must admit I'm a bit on thin ice when answering that, but when you increase the electric conductivity, like just the osmotic stress, that is something that can be possibly repaired if you flush with water and if you have some rain. But if you get the soda conditions and you get a collapse in the soil structure, then you have more permanent damages. And then you ask the impact of soil biology, I think. Yeah, and we think, and we don't only think, we know, the bacteria, there's like a symbiosis between bacteria and the plants. They're not just there for fun. They are there because at the root surface, they get this low molecular weight organic acids, and what they contribute with is to sort of mine out the cation aid, especially fungus. They have the built-in uptake of the phosphorus. So we need a healthy biology around the roots. And what we think is, I think we also learned that from the SalFar test, so that there was some sort of a memory in the soil. So if you have a soil biology that is adapted to the cellular conditions, the plant perform better because there's already someone there to help them.
Is there also seem like increasing production over the years then, because the soil is adapting towards the
Again?
That if it adapts to the salt itself, you would expect any increase in production over the years. Is that what it seems?
Yes, yes. That is the hypothesis, and we think that is the case.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Just one remark from me, that is about the clay soil. This afternoon we are going to see the experimental farm that is all based on clay soil. So if you have more questions on clay soil, you can ask our team member Karina. She's there to answer all these questions. Okay, thank you very much, Asgeir. Very interesting. And now we have Hans Wevers with his presentation about the North Sea region and the Interreg program. He's our project advisor from the Interreg Secretariat, and
So, thank you, Angelica, and all the other presenters. And thank you for having me here. I'm happy to tell a little bit on behalf of the North Sea Region program about Saline Farming and the project. But first, maybe for those who are not familiar with the Interreg program as such, I would like to tell a little bit about Interreg and how it is implemented in the European Union. So when we look at the Interreg program, it's an instrument for building cohesion and implementing cohesion policy within Europe. And Interreg is a key instrument for that. And it's mainly about cooperation. So this is what Interreg tries to implement between the countries and the regions, cooperation. And we've seen that in SalFar as a very good example. So you have three strands of Interreg. It's the cross-border cooperation program, which is a kind of regional level. And there are about 60 programs in Europe in the internal borders. And then there is the transnational cooperation program, of which North Sea region is an example. And then there are the interregional programs, which are spread as a cooperation over the whole of Europe. So when we look at our North Sea region area, we can see that it has been slightly changed compared to the 5B program. We have now the 6B program starting in 2021, and you can see that the UK is no longer part of our program, unfortunately, just because of Brexit, of course. But on the other hand, we have new regions, for instance, the north of France, from Brittany up to the north, and also the full of the Netherlands is part now of the North Sea program. And of course, our shared asset is the North Sea. Okay, when we look at our new program, we can see that there are four priorities, as we call them. The first one is robust and smart economies. The second one is about the green transition. The third one about climate resilience. And the last one about governance. And when you look a little bit more in detail to these program priorities, you can see the specific objectives. For robust and smart economies, we are looking for research and innovation projects and smart specialization projects. Green transition, that would be energy efficiency and low emissions, renewable energy, of course, smart energy and grid and storage, the circular economy, and multimodal urban mobility. So you can think about saline farming, maybe fitting under these green transition specific objectives, but there are also maybe overlaps with the climate resilience, like climate adaptation risk disaster, but the biodiversity, pollution, and green infrastructure. And finally, as a new priority in our program, we have better governance. So this is about aligning the way of working between regional governments to implement new solutions. So, but we are here, of course, for saline farming and for the final conference. And what I did, I just looked up the initial application of saline farming, and there were the next or following planned and realized objectives. So when we look at transnational knowledge sharing, what I could see as a project advisor, saline farming work together from university to farms, and from data collection to, for instance, tasting gardens. There are also sustainable outcomes, like the international networks, as now saline farming, as I understood, is also part of the FAO network, and local workshops. There is a brand design developed, a brand label, criteria to be allowed to use this label, publication of a brand book, and this will lead to business opportunities, from saline food products to, for instance, seaweed fertilizers, and from business models to regional services. And finally, piloting saline agriculture. There were 9 pilots planned, And in the end, we have 50 pilots reported, so that's a very good achievement. Okay, when we look at the application in 2016, Saline Farming was assessed on a few very strong points. Resource efficiency, by reusing degraded farmland, sharing transnational good practices, contribution to a wider and national policies, and relevant partnership from all countries around the North Sea region. So this is exactly what we would like to see as a transnational program for a good project. Then, in the end, I would like to mention a few unplanned project outcomes. As a project advisor, it's always very nice to see that the agreed project objectives are achieved, but it is also very nice to see that there are always unplanned project outcomes. And what I noticed was that there were 27 field labs with various plants, crops and fertilizers. I saw and read that there were experiments with over 20,000 seeds. There were interesting publications like The Future of Sustainable Agriculture in Saline Environments and the Inspiration Guide for Saline Farming. And finally, I think the project gained a lot of interest from the TV and companies, and for instance, there was a ZDF documentary broadcasted. So I think all in all, we can say that saline farming gained a lot of exposure, not only for our program, but also for the topic of saline farming. So, therefore, as a program, we would like to thank the SalFar partnership, and maybe more specific, also Angelica and Douwe, to be the lead partners of this project, to be always very active and cooperative with us. So, I think we can look back. It's a very successful project, and I hope that there will be a sustainable future for the saline farming as a concept. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrik. I'm pleased that you are satisfied with our project so far. I hope you will be satisfied with our final report as well, because that is the thing that has to come. Right? After all this work has to be summarized, the big final report, and we are working on that already. I wonder if there are questions about the Interreg program, if anybody is interested to or has in mind to run a project within Interreg or anything else. Just let us know. Okay. Not at the moment. Yeah, there.
Yeah. I'm wondering, do you only support short-lived projects, or do you also try to implement the results of a project like this into practice over the long term?
That's a good question. Yes, indeed, we aim for long-term impact. So most of the project durations are between 4 and 5 years, so to say. But we pay a lot of attention for what we call capitalization of the project outcomes. So we do follow up after the project ends to the finished projects. And we hope, of course, and this is we try to push projects in that direction, that it's not only a report put upon the shelf, but that it's really something which is implemented. We prefer tangible outcomes which can be really used and which can be really helpful in solving problems. I think saline farming is a very nice example, and having food products in restaurants which can be tasted by the citizens and the consumers, but also on some scientific side there are a lot of achievements, I think. So it's really a nice mix of what we would like to see as long-term impact. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
De microfoon Henk Staghouwer, University of Groningen. I was not involved in this project, but in quite a few other Interreg projects in the North Sea region. My experience is that in the application, of course, you state objectives and deliverables, and in the course of the project, these deliverables are very key, because as an actor in a project, you think that the organization in Viborg is especially happy when the deliverables are reached. 20,000 people reached, 10 pilots and so on. Now you show that in this project, and it's also my experience in other projects, there are all kind of unforeseen positive elements. Things which were not stated as deliverable, but at least, or they were mentioned, but in low numbers, lower numbers, and in the end you reach all kind of unexpected things, and sometimes also, of course, you do not meet the standards which you have with yourself. Wouldn't it be good to make projects innovative, and also the project groups as innovative as possible, to come up with some sort of a reward for, and I'm not talking specifically about SalFar, I'm not asking for money for them or so, but wouldn't it be good in general to have a structure where this unforeseen, unexpected, positive results could be rewarded in one way or another? Probably as a kind of starter for a next project. Could be that you get a priority position or something like that. To some extent that's the case. I know that you need to be a bit experienced in Interreg projects to have a bigger chance to get your new project through. You know more and you're seen as a reliable actor and so on and so forth. But wouldn't that be a good idea to, let's say, to push actors into more innovation, even more innovation as they do now? Because I'm convinced about this project, no doubt about that. I'd like to have your opinion about that.
Interesting idea, but maybe a few things. First of all, having these unexpected outcomes is not attached to every project. It is really, and I can see it in Saline Farming, and I have some other examples, attached to projects which are really active, which have a topic which is spreading over the North Sea, for instance, where there is a broad interest, and maybe it's a niche market, but there was a broad interest, and there are a lot of nice outcomes and tangible products. To have a kind of incentive or whatever for future projects of this, that would be difficult, because we also want new projects, and it can be the case, of course, that you prolong outcomes of an existing project, then in a new way, doing new things, as building up your success of your current project, but it can never be too much of the same. This is not what the program wants. But we try to also stimulate projects, at least to promote and to communicate about the project. And we also have a kind of prize is not the right word, but they get extra attention. For instance, in May we have our conference in Bruges, where we will have a few projects in the spotlight, which were extraordinary in their communication, for instance. So we try to stimulate them. But yeah, to come back on your question, can you reward a project for their unexpected outcomes? That would be hard, but I take it with me to Viborg, and who knows?
Good idea. Take it with you, because before we had some kind of the North Sea Region Sea Star kind of little awards where people could. This was more symbolic, more or less, you know. Good idea. Thank you, dear.
So my name is Jeroen from ILVO. As a policy-oriented researcher, I'm very happy to see better governance in there. As researchers, we're always trying to understand what is actually the program about. You're here now, so maybe you can unveil us a little bit. How did better governance got on the radar? What is actually what you're looking for with better governance? And a practical question, is it better governance related to a EU-oriented instrument, like your counterpartners Interreg Europe, or can it also just be about local policy instruments?
Yes, maybe it's good to mention that the better governance priority as such is completely new to the program. It was felt with the program preparation group that we needed something to have something on this issue, and it is meant to align local or regional governances on specific topics. So yes, it is for regional and local governance, and it can be on all kind of topics. So, but for our program, please, I have to be a bit more specific. We mainly support better governance on the topics of our other priorities. So on sustainable growth, on the green transition, also on innovation and smart specialization. But we have to see how it works out because, as I said, it's a new specific objective in our program. And we felt that there was a need for it to align governance within the region. But we have to see with the applications of new projects, how people in the region experience it themselves.
Hello, my name is Dorte Storpe. I'm from SalFar in Denmark. I just want to hear about governance. Is it only public governance that you're looking into, or is it also private governance?
Well, it is mainly public governance, but if there are private elements, so to say, in it, that's of course possible. Yes, why not? If it is contributing to align certain policies or certain implementation aspects of challenges we face in the North Sea, then it can be both.
Of course, I have a special interest in the policy for agriculture, since that's my company's interest as well. So, working together with other agricultural organizations in Europe, making sustainability more coherent and cooperation more general, could that be a topic?
Yes, this is put very broadly, of course, but
yes, I don't have a specific project. It's just to hear if private.
No, but it could be a topic. Yeah.
So, any more questions to the Interreg program? I mean, Hans will be with us also for the discussion. Or
yeah. Yes. Also
ask him later if you wish to. That's great. Thank you very much, Hans. That was really good to hear what the future program means for us. Pretty well in time. Just one more remark. We have some follow-ups of this project, but they are. We will hear in detail about new projects tomorrow from Ian, from Frank, from the Gothenburg Emden, and from the Zoutknooppunt, as we call it here, and from the knowledge cluster Saline Farming, and the colleagues will be there tomorrow to tell you more about it in detail. So there have been 4 projects already which have come out of, and not to mention, I forgot the very famous salad project, which also has come out already of the Saline Farming project. So that is also very positive, talking about capitalization on results. I think we are very, very well with the time planning, and so I have a few huishoudelijke mededeling, as we call it, and that has to do with the excursion, the highlight of today. So we have organized 2 buses, and these buses will stop right in front of the, what we call Vindicatgebouw. There you have the big Hooghout letters on top of there, that is next to the Market Hotel. So this is just opposite the road. Be careful, there are many bikes around here and sometimes buses and so on and so on. So look well where you go. But it's just 50 meters from here, if not 30. That is one thing. Second thing is, as you know, it is mentioned in the program, you will have lunch boxes to take with you. And these lunch boxes are here in front of us at the Bali, and you can take, all of you can take 1 lunch box. If you're very hungry, you can take 2, but I think 1. Take 2. That should be right. And next thing is about tonight. Some people have experienced already 2 different entrances to the building of the province. There will be a 3rd one tonight, because we will have the saline dinner in the old part of the building. So there is a very festive space room, and that is the so-called Statenzaal, where all the political debates will take place. And that you can get there from the main entrance of the old building, which is just opposite the big church there. So that is, the address is Martini Kerkhof 12. Please go there tonight for the saline dinner. I mean, all the other entrances are closed anyhow, so you won't get in there. So that's fine. And are there any more questions about the excursion or anything? Yes, I had 2 more questions from people who were asking, oh, can we just change clothes before we get onto the bus? Yes, you can. Yeah, because we have 10 minutes time. The buses will be ready at 12 at the place I just described next to the Market Hotel. Okay? And I wish you a very nice excursion, and be prepared to see much of the Groningen landscape, and we have somebody with us also to tell us more about the landscape. Thank you.